the inevitable question of youth: what am I going to be when I grow up? And there are some options. Maybe I'll be this cute little firefighter, or maybe I'll do something along this lines. I'll be a doctor, or maybe I will be this. Maybe I'll just work for the government. What am I going to do with my life? What am I going to be when I grow up? You recognize for a lot of people that we find their story in the Bible, they never had to wrestle with that question. It was really clear. Jeremiah, book of Jeremiah, it begins this way. Jeremiah 1, verse 4, the word of the Lord came to me saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Wouldn't that be nice? I mean, for Jeremiah, he never had to wrestle with what am I going to be when I grow up. It was clear. He was called. He was called by God. And so was Moses. Right? Exodus chapter 3, verse 10, we get this. God says, so now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. For Moses, it was clear. He was called by God. When you read things like this in the Bible and see people who get these divine callings and these divine assignments, do you ever think, well, what about me? Will God ever have anything like that for me? Have you ever had any kind of a divine calling like that in your life? You know, typically at the Ridge, we teach through books of the Bible. We're just coming off about 9 months going through the New Testament book of James. And in a few weeks, we're going to start teaching through the Old Testament book of 1 Kings. For a few weeks between those two series, we are doing this. We're calling it God at Work. We recognize that God, vast portions of our life are spent working, and God has a lot to say about that. And remember, that you don't have to be getting a paycheck for it to be work. Right? Students, taking your studies seriously, well, that's work. And retirees, finding meaningful ways to invest your time, that's your work. Stay-at-home parents, well, that's work. Well, Acts chapter 9, a man by the name of Saul, he had a job. His job was to stop the spread of the Jesus movement. And he was doing that well until this happened. Chapter 9, verses 3 through 5. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? Saul asked. I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting, he replied. If you experience the presence and the power of the resurrected Jesus, this, whom you are persecuting, those are not the words that you want to hear. Saul instantly realized he was on the wrong team. Well, instead of punishing Saul, instead of shaming Saul, he really surprised him by saying this, verse 6, now, get up and go into the city. And in verse 15, this man is my chosen instrument to carry my name before the Gentiles and their kings and before the people of Israel. How about that? Jesus didn't say, Saul, you are fired. What you're doing, it's been wrong. Saul, what you're doing, it's evil. You're done. You're out of here. No, rather, Jesus says, you're hired. I want you to lead my team. Now this guy Saul, he doesn't just have a job. He's got a divine calling. How would you like to have that? How would you like to have a job that's God ordained? How would you like to have a job that has daily meaning and lasting purpose? How would you like to know your divine calling? You can. God, He shows us how. Traditionally, sociologists, they point to three differing orientations that people and cultures have when it comes to work. First orientation to work is this one, seeing work as, survival. This is the mentality that work, it's a job. It's a necessary means to an end. If you want to eat, you need to work. The primary purpose of work in this orientation is to get money, to put food on the table, to put a roof over your head, to pay your bills, to survive. The second orientation to work, it's to approach work as a career. We say, a job is something that's necessary to pay the bills and to make ends meet, but a career, it provides more than that. With a career is the source of our income and also our identity. It can be where we find our self-worth. We can measure our value by how well we do and how far we climb. If I climb really high, then I'm going to get more respect and I can feel good about who I am. There's a third traditional orientation to our work, and that's this. It's work as sacred calling. This one says that some people are called to have a spiritual purpose in their work. Sacred calling. This is language that has traditionally been reserved for the clergy. A life of prayer and worship and service through the church. Other work wasn't considered to be evil. It was necessary. It was just considered to be lesser because they were concerned with the things of earth, while the clergy were concerned with the things of heaven. What if all three of these orientations, work as survival, work as career, work as sacred calling, what if all three of those are wrong? Because one of the early church leaders, a man by the name of Martin Luther, said, they are all wrong. Martin Luther put it this way. He said, the works of monks and priests, however holy and arduous they be, do not differ one whit in the sight of God from the works of the rustic laborer in the field or the woman going about her household tasks. In the year 1517, a pretty drastic thing happened with the church. Leaders such as Martin Luther, they called the followers of Jesus back to the Bible. They said, we've drifted away from what's contained in this book. We want to come back to that. And so history records this season as the Protestant Reformation. It was a reformation of a lot of things within the church. One of the things, was the understanding of work, the role of work. Medieval Catholicism, they had been teaching that the highest possible calling is this. Do you think that holy little guy needs diapers? Probably. The reformers said this distinction between sacred calling and normal everyday work, they said that is not found in this book. Rather, they pointed to this. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31 tells us, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. They said there's no distinction. There is no distinction between sacred and secular. All of life is sacred. All of life can be lived to the glory of God. All of life can make a contribution to His kingdom. They recognized worship and glorifying God. That's not just something to do in a cathedral. That's not just something we do when we gather together, for a worship service. They said that, bringing glory and worship to God, that is something that can happen on our everyday, ordinary activities, including work. So here's what that means. That means you have been called. You have been called. God calls his followers into all kinds of fields: business, government, medicine, education, social services, media, you name it. Maybe we should do something like this just so we remind ourselves, I am called. That is God's design. According to the Bible, life is mission. Work is calling. Mission isn't just something that happens here or in Belize or in Africa. The biblical vision is that calling is woven through all of life. All of it. Remember Saul? After he encountered the resurrected Jesus on the road to Damascus, well, a little while, sometime after that, they renamed him Paul, the Apostle Paul. Apart from Jesus, no biblical figure has had a greater impact on Christianity than this guy Paul. He started dozens of churches. He articulated the theology that would shape Western civilization. Through the Holy Spirit, he wrote over half the New Testament. And Paul had a job. You know that? You know what Paul's job was? Well, we find it. Acts chapter 18, verses 2 and 3 tells us this. Paul went to see them, and because he was a tent maker, as they were, he stayed and worked with them. You know when this was? The order is really important when it comes to this passage. We had the Damascus Road. We started with that. Paul, his conversion and his calling. That was in Acts chapter 9. This, Paul's job, Paul is a tent maker. This is found in Acts chapter 18, which means this comes after his calling. Paul had a job. Paul still had a job. Paul, he had a job outside of the walls of the church. So here's the Apostle Paul, leader of the Jesus movement. He never stopped being a tent maker. When you go through, you ever read through the book in the Bible of Acts, you can look and say, well, what was Paul's strategy? He was the one who really moved the Jesus movement beyond Jerusalem into other areas in the world. He went into cities. He went mission after mission after mission. He had two primary strategies. Almost one of these two in almost every city that he got to. One of his strategies, he was Jewish. And so he would go into a city, he would find the Jewish community, he would go to their synagogue, and he was trained as a rabbi so he could open up the Bible and he could, teach from it. Their Bible was the Old Testament. And so what he did is he went through the Old Testament and showed how Jesus was the fulfillment of the Old Testament. That's strategy number one. He had another strategy. His second strategy was for people who were not Jewish, who didn't say, hey, man, the Old Testament, we're in on that. What he did for this, these are the people called the Gentiles, his strategy was to use his job. He used his job to get into a city. He used his job to make contacts. He used his job to establish connections. He used his job to build relationships. And then once he did that, once he had built some networks and friendships and relationships, then he started doing some pretty significant kingdom work. Having a divine calling, being a full-time employee of God, doesn't mean you got to work in a church. Having a calling from God, well, that doesn't negate an earthly occupation. Rather, it uses it. Paul didn't quit his job to become a missionary. Rather, Paul used his job to be a missionary. Do you see the difference? It's an important difference. It tells us something about what God has designed for our lives. God, he used Paul's trade to accomplish his calling. And God, he can do that in your life. He can do that in my life. God, he can use your job, he can use your work to fulfill your life calling. Maybe you hear this and you think, calling from God. I like that. That sounds meaningful. That sounds inspirational. It sounds purposeful. But I live in the real world, and my job doesn't always feel that way. Sometimes our work feels more like this. The person with the broom. Ever had a job like that? Ever been there? Ever had a day when you feel like you're just the one sweeping up the street? Well, why? Why sometimes, if God created work to be, we have a calling and we have a divine calling to be in mission with our work, through Him, why sometimes does our work feel like such a burden? I think one of the primary reasons is this, a lack of awareness. Because we don't know or we forget that God, He designed and He created work. He did that for a reason. So we should ask, well, what's the reason? What's the purpose? Why did a good God design and create work? Did He do that for a paycheck? Well, that's a benefit of work, but that is not the primary reason. What's the purpose? Jesus clarified the purpose. Matthew chapter 22, verses 37 through 39, Jesus says this, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself." We refer to that as the great commandment, and the great commandment, you realize, that applies to our work. God's central purpose for work, it's not just to bless me, it's not just to advance me, it's not just to bring honor to me, but rather God's design and God's purpose for work is to bless and to serve and to love someone else. God's design for work, well, it is a practical way for you and I to bless someone else, to love and to serve someone else, to meet the needs and provide for other people. Following Jesus, it's not something that's primarily lived out in the church or in church activities. Right? Rather, these involvements equip us, and they prepare us, and they motivate us to go out and to bless this world. Work is something that was designed and created by God for us to love and to serve and to bless others, to participate in His plan to bring restoration to this world. 1 Corinthians 10:31. "So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God." You and I, we will never find lasting meaning and purpose and fulfillment in our work, whatever our work happens to be, until we align our work with God's purpose for work. Work is a way that God designed us to be able to get beyond ourselves, to get beyond our own self-interest, and to serve and to bless and to add value to other people. The Bible offers a unique understanding of the purpose of work in this world. We are encouraged not to choose a job or do our work just to fulfill ourselves or to accrue money or to accrue a title or status or power. Followers of Jesus, we are called to see our work as a way to serve God and to bless people. If we want to thrive at life, we need to connect God's purpose for work to our work. Maybe you're thinking, okay, Mike, I get that, and I think I can get around to agreeing to that. I mean, that sounds good to have purpose in our work, to help and to bless other people, but how does that work? What does that look like in my particular job, in my vocation? How can I do that? What will that look like for me when I clock in tomorrow? Well, I think it's helpful when you go in, instead of just, day after day after day after day after day, I think it's really helpful to be intentional. What is helpful for me is to actually go through, before the day begins in the morning, to look through my calendar. To say, okay, here's what I've got planned. Here's what's on my to-do list today. And then to ask the question like this, well, how is what I am going to do today an opportunity to bless someone? And I just kind of tick through the various things that are coming up for me today. How can I bless someone in that? How can I bless someone in that? And start connecting God's purpose for work with what I am actually going to do on that day. Or maybe it'd be helpful to take a step a little further back and say, how is my organization or how is my job? How is that something that is making a contribution to this world? Let's take a few specific examples. I think it's a good theory, but this theory doesn't do much if we don't actually connect it to what we're doing on a daily basis. So the theory is to say, how can I connect my work with God's purpose for work? So let's take an example. Let's say that your occupation is, let's say you're a lawyer. And if you're wondering what a lawyer does, a lawyer is a person who writes like a 100-page document and calls it a brief. So if you're a lawyer and you're thinking, well, how is what I'm going to do today, how can I connect that with God's work? How is that calling? How is that purpose? Where's the meaning in that? So, well, look at your schedule for the day and ask, how of these things I have, of these appointments, of these to do, how can any of these, how can they actually be used to help someone? You can look through that and say, oh, well, here, I'm going to meet with this client, and they're in a bad situation. I could use this as an opportunity to protect that person. Or I could use this as an opportunity. This is a way that I can uphold justice. Or this is a way that I can restrain evil. You see it. The purpose isn't a six-figure salary. The purpose is, well, helping people. Or maybe your job is in the service industry. Say, okay, well, how can I connect those dots? When I go into the office, how will that work? Say, well, you're surrounded by people all day long. What an amazing opportunity. What's my calling? What's my role? How can I bless people today? Well, a lot of different ways. What my calling, you can say today, is to find something to encourage somebody. Or my calling today is to find someone and just listen to that person for a little while. Or my calling today is to offer some hospitality to that person. See, my calling to hear it, it's not $15 an hour. It's helping someone. Or if I'm in business, if I'm working for a corporation, say, well, where's my purpose in that? What can I do? What can be of value? What can be of help? What's my calling? Well, my calling, you look and say, well, I am called to cultivate an organization that values people. Maybe I can find a way today to bless an employee. Maybe I can find a way today to meet some of the needs in our community. Maybe I can find a way to advance some of the purposes that our organization provides for people. You hear the purpose. It's not having an executive title. We got to get beyond those things if we want to experience lasting meaning and purpose and find out how what I am doing today connects with people. Helping, serving people. That's one of the reasons God created us. 1 Corinthians 10:31 says this, so whether you eat or drink, or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. See, following Jesus, it's not just about personal piety and prayer and morality and worship services. Following Jesus is a whole lot bigger than that. Following Jesus is a way of seeing and offering all of who we are, all of what we do, offering it to Him. The prevailing thought in our culture is that work serves as the source of our income and our identity and our self-worth. You know, we can think things like, well, I can make money for me. I can accumulate wealth and purchase comfort for me. I can work hard and I can climb the ladder and I can earn value and respect for me. Understand that is not God's view of work. It's not. That is not what you have been designed to do. And that may be the reason why some of us find work so empty. Doing it for the wrong reason. Working for the wrong boss, working for the wrong king. See, thinking of work primarily as a means for self-fulfillment and financial gain, what that does, that slowly erodes us as a person, and that distances us from God's design. According to the Bible, the purpose of work is not just to provide for me. Work is a way for me to love and to serve and to add value to someone else. When we recapture the biblical teaching of work and calling, we can recognize that the work we do, it doesn't just put food on the table. It doesn't just bring career accolades to me. It's important. We all interact with human beings. We all represent Jesus. We all have a sacred vocation. We are all on mission. Through his people, Jesus is active and involved in every realm in our world. So whether your occupation is something along the lines of this, public service, or maybe your occupation is more along the lines of this, we'll call that customer service. Or maybe your life stage is something like this. Maybe you're retired. Whatever stage of life you're in, whatever occupation you have, if you want to thrive at life, it is essential to connect your work with God's purpose for work. God's purpose for work. It's not just to provide for me. It's a practical way that I can love and serve and add value to others. When we get that, we don't just clock in and clock out. When we get that, then we are partnering with God in his plan to be present and be a force for good in this world.